was the most amazing birth story ever told. The narrative heralded the arrival of one praised as the child of the Most High God, the Savior of the world, who was said to be the personification of peace on earth, God incarnate, fully divine and fully human. Perhaps you've heard it too. Clearly, there was something unique about this child around whom legends were formed. Let's look again to the Nativity. I sometimes ask myself who, among all the characters in the living Nativity, I would most like to meet. And this year, as in so many others, my thoughts turn to Mary, Mother of Jesus. I wonder who this mysterious woman is that some revere and some almost ignore, and what wisdom she has for us on preparing for the coming of her child. Who is Mary? It seems like everyone has a different answer to that question. To our culture, Mary is a figure in a snow dome, silent, immobile, gazing at the manger, a plastic figure to be taken out of the box of ornaments for a few days each year. To many Catholics, she is a venerated figure. I enjoy paying attention to the names of churches, and Catholic and Orthodox church names tend to give me the most pleasure. Names such as Our Lady of Perpetual Help, Our Lady of Grace, Queen of the Universe, and Our Lady of Good Counsel. Those names say a lot about who some believe Mary to be in relation to their faith. Mary acts as a go-between with us on earth and God in heaven. During the Middle Ages, when the church's leadership became more distant from the people, Mary became important in the prayer lives of common folk. She was seen as one who could empathize with their plight and mediate forgiveness. In the councils of the church through the centuries, she gradually gained in supernatural qualities. She was declared absolutely free from personal sin before her birth, and to this day, she remained perpetually a virgin. She did not die a natural death, but was taken directly from earth to heaven. I think it is safe to say that most of us gathered this morning likely feel that Mary's role is overemphasized. For many, Mary is simply the woman chosen to facilitate the arrival of God's special child, whom many consider to be the Christ, into the world. I think it's safe to say that many Catholics feel Protestants underemphasize Mary's role in salvation history. But both worship of Mary and reducing her to a biological role miss out on something very important. Mary's example is a person of faith struggling with the daily demands of her life. This Mary can help us prepare spiritually for the coming of her child. Where do we go to find such a Mary? Not to Mark, who never mentions her, or Matthew, who focuses on Joseph, or John, who tells us that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, but doesn't elaborate on the details. It is Luke that portrays the fullness of Mary's humanity as an example of faith for us. Luke cracks open the snow dome and lets Mary out to stand flesh and blood, life-size, before us and invite us to participate with her in giving birth to, raising, mourning, and eventually following her child in the way of love. Luke portrays her in a startling role, one that shakes up the way we've been brought up to think of her and invites us to stop observing her and start imitating her. For Luke, Mary is a prophet. We tend to think of Mary not as outspoken and bold for justice, but as quiet and passive. Yet in the Canticle of Mary, which you can read in Luke chapter 1, 46 to 55, she sings a song of praise to the divine presence that shakes up the status quo, lifts up the humble like her, and chooses her rather than a high-born woman to be a bearer of the divine gift. She foreshadows her child's ministry that will likewise lift up the lowly. If we have trouble seeing gentle Mary, meek and mild as a prophet, we need to remind ourselves that her call mirrors that of other prophets. Her call to be a prophet follows the pattern even of prophetic commissioning call. Call, objection, God ignoring the objection, and God's assurance that they are committed to the prophet and their mission. First is the call to the prophet. Isaiah and Ezekiel saw visions. Jeremiah heard only a word. Elijah, a still small voice in the silence of his heart. In Mary's case, an angel confronted her. Then the divine voice tells the prophet they have been chosen and what to do. And the angel says to Mary, "And now you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you will name him Jesus." Then the prophet objects to the commission by protesting their inadequacy or pointing to some factor that makes it impossible. Jeremiah said he didn't know how to speak, as he was only a boy. Moses protested that he wasn't a good public speaker. And Mary said, "How can this be, since I am a virgin?" Of course, in the entire Bible, God never listens to someone's objection and says, "You're right. You've convinced me that you're not qualified as I thought. I'll keep looking." The prophets were not chosen because they were ready to be chosen and they felt confident in their abilities. And it was a good time for them to clear their calendars of other commitments. God reassures them that the divine presence will be with them in carrying out the call. The prophet isn't to speak out of their own wisdom or eloquence, but to be a divine messenger. "Hail, favored one. Don't be afraid. Love is with you. Nothing will be impossible with God." Mary, the prophet, urges us to look for signs of our own resistance to our call. How frightening to have our familiar excuses taken from us by a reassurance that we are held in divine love. So, of what does Mary's call to be a prophet consist? To be a mother of her child? I wonder if, as she heard reports of his fearless teaching and growing enemies, she flashed back to the early days when she held him securely in her arms. In fulfilling her prophetic call to be a mother, I imagine her heart ached when he showed signs of a dangerous vocation. Perhaps even when he stayed behind at the temple and she had to search for him for days. When she and his brothers come to stand outside the house where he is teaching, perhaps to warn him to stop speaking out so boldly. And he refused to interrupt his teachings to see them. After all, they deserve no more special attention than any others who are all his family. She never seems to turn against him and grows into the second portion of her prophetic call. John tells us she was there at the cross, risking her life along with the other women. Mary is the first disciple. She modeled faithfulness for her unborn child, even in her words to the angel. "Let it be to me according to your word." Later modeling her own faithfulness after her child's example. What happened to Mary after Jesus' death? Luke tells us in Acts that she was in the upper room with the disciples after his resurrection, perhaps to continue to share her wisdom with the community. We need her wisdom this Advent. We are all like her in the scene from Luke 1, called by divine love. And we all experience pushback as Spirit objects to our objections, yet still offers us reassurance that nothing is impossible with God. Let's continue to wonder about and with Mary as we prepare for the birth of the baby, who calls us to seek the way of love in the messiness of the world, the stuff of life. Let's find the hope and love for which we hunger. And let's all help ensure that everyone has enough. And maybe like Mary, we can each find the divine power that lives and breathes in us. Power that drives the hunger for justice and peace that was born in us and lives within us. Let's all have a hand in making sure that those who hunger are filled with good things, and that one mother's dream will not die. The dream can be born in you and live in you if you allow it to be. Let it be said of you that you live that dream, a dream where justice leads to peace and where love conquers all. Let it be said of you that you, dear divine lovers, that you too are a child of the divine, a princess of peace, a wonderful counselor, God with us. As we follow the way of love all our days, for that journey, we need a mother's wisdom. This is part of our story.